I was poor for 13 years. I thought like a poor person. I saw the world the way poor people see it. I made decisions the way poor people make them. I believe what poor people believe. I was trapped in poverty thinking, even though I desperately wanted to escape poverty. Then something changed. Not my circumstances at first, my thinking, the way I saw money, the way I understood wealth, the way I made decisions, the way I approached opportunity, the way I thought about time and risk and value and future. My thinking changed before my circumstances changed. And once my thinking changed, my circumstances followed. Not immediately, not magically, but inevitably, over years, through consistent action guided by different thinking. I became wealthy because I stopped thinking like a poor person and started thinking like a wealthy person. Long before I had any wealth, long before I had any evidence that wealthy thinking would work, long before anyone would have called me anything but poor. The difference between poverty and wealth is not money. Money is the result. The difference is thinking, how you see the world, how you make decisions, how you approach problems, how you value time, how you assess risk, how you define success, how you measure progress, how you deploy resources, how you build toward future. Let me show you the difference, the real difference, the difference I lived on both sides, the difference that transformed me from a poor Scottish immigrant working in a factory basement to the richest man in the world. Poor people think in terms of income. Wealthy people think in terms of assets. When I was poor, I thought about how much I earned. $1.20 a week. That was my measure of wealth, my measure of progress, my measure of security, how much money came in each week, how much I was paid for my labor, how much I earned trading my time. This is poverty thinking. Income is the measure. Wages are the goal. Higher pay is success. More hours means more money. Better job means higher wages. Everything is measured by what you are paid, what flows in, what you earn, what you receive for your time. This thinking keeps you poor because income has a ceiling. You can only work so many hours. You can only earn so much per hour. You can only trade so much time for so much money. Income is limited by time, and time is limited, so income thinking guarantees limited results. When I started thinking like a wealthy person, I stopped thinking about income and started thinking about assets. Not what I earned, but what I owned. Not what I was paid, but what I controlled. Not wages flowing in, but assets generating returns. Not trading time for money, but building things that created money without my time. I invested my first real money in Adams Express Company. This was asset thinking. I was not buying income. I was buying an ownership position, a piece of something that generated returns, an asset that worked for me, that created value independent of my time, that compounded, that grew, that produced income while I did other things. This is wealth thinking. Assets are the measure. Ownership is the goal. What you control is success. What generates returns without your time is progress. What compounds is security. Everything is measured by what you own that creates value, what you control that produces returns, what you build that works for you. This thinking creates wealth because assets have no ceiling. You can own multiple assets. Assets can grow indefinitely. Assets can compound forever. Assets can produce more income than any wage. Assets work 24 hours a day. Assets do not get tired. Assets do not need rest. Assets create wealth while you sleep. Poor people focus on earning more. Wealthy people focus on owning more. Poor people want higher wages. Wealthy people want more assets. Poor people trade time for money. Wealthy people build systems that create money. Poor people measure income. Wealthy people measure ownership. Poor people think about what they are paid. Wealthy people think about what they control. This is the first fundamental difference in thinking, and this difference alone explains why some people stay poor while others become wealthy. Not because wealthy people earn more, but because they think about wealth differently. They measure different things. They optimize for different outcomes. They build toward different goals. They think in terms of assets, not income, ownership, not wages, systems, not labor, control, not payment. Poor people avoid risk. Wealthy people calculate risk. When Thomas Scott offered me the chance to invest in Adams Express, I was terrified. The investment required $500. My mother had to mortgage our house, everything we had, our only security. If the investment failed, we would be homeless. This was enormous risk, terrifying risk, the kind of risk poor people avoid, the kind of risk that keep people poor, because avoiding risk means avoiding opportunity, and avoiding opportunity means staying exactly where you are. But I did not avoid the risk. I calculated it. I analyzed the opportunity. I understood the business. I studied the market. I assessed the probability of success. I measured the potential return against the potential loss. I made a decision based on calculation, not emotion, based on analysis, not fear, based on understanding, not ignorance. This is wealthy thinking, not avoiding risk, not embracing risk recklessly, but calculating risk rationally, understanding what you are risking, understanding what you could gain, understanding the probability of each outcome, understanding whether the potential reward justifies the potential loss, and making decisions based on that understanding instead of based on fear. Poor people see all risk as danger. They avoid uncertainty. They refuse to bet. They hold on to what little they have. They never take chances. They play it completely safe. And by avoiding all risk, they avoid all opportunity, because every opportunity involves some risk. Every possibility involves some uncertainty. Every chance at improvement involves some danger. This risk avoidance keeps people poor, because staying poor is also risky. Being powerless is also dangerous. Having no options is also threatening. Poverty is not safety. Poverty is vulnerability. And refusing to risk what little you have to gain something better guarantees you stay vulnerable forever. Wealthy thinking recognizes that risk is unavoidable. Everything is risky. Staying poor is risky. Taking chances is risky. The question is not whether to risk. The question is which risk to take. The risk of staying where you are, or the risk of trying to move somewhere better. The risk of certain mediocrity, or the risk of possible excellence. The risk of predictable poverty, or the risk of uncertain wealth. Wealthy people calculate these risks. They assess probabilities. They measure potential outcomes. They understand what they are betting. They make rational decisions about which risks are worth taking. They do not avoid risk. They manage risk. They take calculated risks, strategic risks, informed risks, risks based on understanding rather than fear, risks that could lose what they have but could gain much more, risks that make sense when analyzed rather than felt. Poor people feel risk. Wealthy people calculate risk. Poor people fear uncertainty. Wealthy people analyze uncertainty. Poor people avoid all bets. Wealthy people make strategic bets. Poor people see danger everywhere. Wealthy people see probability distributions. Poor people refuse to risk. Wealthy people manage risk. This difference in how risk is understood determines whether you stay poor or become wealthy. Poor people spend windfalls. Wealthy people invest windfalls. When my Adams Express investment started returning dividends, I had more money than I had ever had. Real money, substantial money, money that could buy things I had never been able to afford. Better food, better clothes, better housing, comfort, relief, reward for the risk I had taken, proof of success, visible improvement in my life. Poor thinking says, spend it, you earned it, you deserve it, you took the risk, you should enjoy the reward, you should improve your life, you should live better, you should show success. You should consume the gains. I did not spend it. I reinvested it, every dollar, into more investments, more assets, more systems that would generate more returns. I lived exactly the same way I had been living, no better, no more comfortable, no visible improvement. I delayed gratification. I sacrificed present consumption for future wealth. I reinvested instead of consumed. This is wealthy thinking. When money comes, invest it, deploy it, use it to create more money, build assets that generate returns, compound the capital, let it grow, let it multiply, let it work. Do not consume it. Do not spend it on lifestyle. Do not improve your standard of living until the wealth is so large that consuming a small portion does not impact the growth. Reinvest everything for years, for decades, until the compounding creates wealth that cannot be depleted by consumption. Poor people cannot do this. When money comes, they spend it. They improve their lifestyle immediately. They reward themselves for their hard work. They consume the gains. They show success through consumption. They live better today using money that could create wealth tomorrow. They trade future wealth for present comfort. They choose consumption over compounding, immediate gratification over delayed multiplication. This spending keeps them poor because they are consuming their seed capital, eating their future, spending money that could multiply, using resources that could compound, choosing comfort today over freedom tomorrow. And comfort today does not lead to wealth tomorrow. It just leads to needing to work for more comfort forever, until you die still working, still comfortable today, still poor tomorrow. Wealthy thinking delays gratification, postpones consumption, sacrifices comfort today, lives below means, reinvests gains, compounds capital, lets money multiply, waits years, waits decades, lives the same way through the early accumulation, does not improve lifestyle until wealth is established, does not consume until compounding has done its work, does not reward with spending until assets are generating enough that small consumption does not matter. This discipline creates wealth. Because reinvested money compounds. Reinvested returns generate more returns. Reinvested gains create more gains. Money that is not consumed grows. Capital that is not spent multiplies. Assets that are not depleted expand. And compounding over time creates wealth that spending could never achieve. Poor people spend today. Wealthy people invest today. Poor people consume gains. Wealthy people compound gains. Poor people reward themselves immediately. Wealthy people delay reward indefinitely. Poor people choose comfort now. Wealthy people choose wealth later. Poor people spend windfalls. Wealthy people invest windfalls. This difference determines everything. Poor people work for money. Wealthy people make money work for them. When I was working in the factory, I was working for money, trading my time for wages, working to earn, laboring to be paid. My effort created my income. My time determined my earnings. I stopped working, I stopped earning. My labor was a source of my money. This is poverty thinking. This thinking keeps you trapped because you're always working, always laboring, always trading time, always dependent on your personal effort, always limited by your personal capacity. You can never rest because resting means no income. You can never stop because stopping means no money. You are a slave to your own labor. You must work until you die or until you can no longer work, and then you have nothing because you only earned while you labored. Wealthy thinking reverses this. Wealthy people work to build systems that work for them. They labor to create assets that labor for them. They trade time initially to build things that generate returns without their time. They work hard at the beginning to create passive income that flows without their effort. They invest their labor in building machines that produce while they rest. I worked hard building Carnegie Steel, extremely hard, for years. But I was not working for wages. I was working to build a system that would generate wealth whether I worked or not. I was creating assets that would produce returns independent of my time. I was building a machine that would run without me so that eventually I could stop working and the wealth would continue so that my money would work instead of me working. This is wealthy thinking. Work to build assets, labor to create systems, trade time to develop passive income, invest effort in building machines that produce without you. Work hard initially to create income that flows without work. Build toward the day when your money works harder than you ever could, when your assets generate more than your labor ever did, when your systems produce while you sleep, when you can stop working and the wealth continues. Most poor people never make this transition. They work for money their entire lives. They trade time for wages until they die. They never build systems. They never create passive income. They never develop assets that work for them, so they must work forever, must labor until their bodies fail, must trade time until they have no more time, and then they have nothing, because their income stopped when their labor stopped. Wealthy people work for a few decades to build systems that work for many decades. They labor hard initially to create income that flows easily later. They sacrifice early to achieve freedom late. They work to build. Then they let the building work for them. Then they live off the returns while the assets continue producing. Then they stop working and the money keeps coming, because they built systems that work for them instead of just working for wages. Poor people work for money. Wealthy people make money work for them. Poor people trade time for wages. Wealthy people build assets that generate income. Poor people must work forever. Wealthy people work initially, then stop while income continues. Poor people labor until they die. Wealthy people labor to build, then rest while systems produce. This is the fundamental difference between poverty and wealth. Poor people think linearly. Wealthy people think exponentially. Poor people think about progress as addition. Work more hours, earn more money, get a raise, make more income, find a better job, receive higher wages. Everything is linear, incremental, additive. 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3. Slow, steady progress through addition, through earning more, through working more, through incremental increases that add up slowly over time. This linear thinking produces linear results. Slow growth, steady but small progress, incremental improvement that takes decades to amount to anything significant. Addition is slow, 1 unit at a time, building gradually, growing steadily but slowly. Never accelerating, never compounding, just adding forever. Wealthy people think exponentially. They think about multiplication, not addition, about compounding, not incrementing, about growth that accelerates, not growth that adds. They understand that 2 times 2 equals 4. 4 times 2 equals 8. 8 times 2 equals 16. 16 times 2 equals 32. Exponential growth, multiplication, compounding that accelerates, that grows faster over time, that produces enormous results given enough time. I thought exponentially about steel production, not about making slightly more steel each year, but about building systems that could double production, triple production, 10 times production, about compounding efficiency, about multiplying output through better processes, about geometric growth, not arithmetic growth, about building something that could grow exponentially, not just incrementally. This exponential thinking creates exponential results. Wealth that compounds, growth that accelerates, progress that multiplies, results that start slow but become enormous, not through addition, through multiplication, through compounding, through geometric growth, through building systems that grow themselves, that expand automatically, that multiply naturally, that compound inevitably. Poor people think if I work twice as hard, I will earn twice as much. This is linear, addition, incremental, slow. Wealthy people think if I build a system that compounds, I will earn exponentially more without working more. This is exponential, multiplication, compounding fast over time. Poor people think about next week. Wealthy people think about next decade. Poor people think about immediate income. Wealthy people think about long-term compounding. Poor people think about earning more today. Wealthy people think about building systems that multiply over time. Poor people think linearly. Wealthy people think exponentially. This difference determines whether growth is slow and steady or slow at first, then explosive. Poor people focus on price. Wealthy people focus on value. When I was poor, everything was about price. What does it cost? Can I afford it? Is it cheap? Is it expensive? How much money do I have to give up to get this? Price was the measure, the decision factor, the determinant consideration. Everything was judged by what it cost. This price focus keeps you poor because the cheapest option is often the worst value. Because focusing only on price means missing value, missing quality, missing durability, missing long-term benefit, missing strategic advantage, missing everything except cost, and optimizing only for low cost means getting low value, low quality. Low durability, low benefit, low everything except low price. Wealthy thinking focuses on value, not price. Not what does it cost, but what is it worth? What will it create? What will it generate? What benefit will it provide? What return will it produce? What advantage will it give? What long-term value will it create? Value is the measure. Benefit over time is the consideration. Return on investment is the decision factor. I paid premium prices for the best equipment for Carnegie steel, for the best engineers, for the best processes, not because I did not care about money, but because I understood that high price for high value is better than low price for low value, that spending more for something that produces more is better than spending less for something that produces less, that the best value is not the lowest price. The best value is the highest return regardless of price. Poor people buy the cheapest. Wealthy people buy the best value. Poor people optimize for low cost. Wealthy people optimize for higher return. Poor people ask what is the price. Wealthy people ask what is the value. Poor people choose based on what they must pay. Wealthy people choose based on what they will receive. Poor people focus on cost. Wealthy people focus on benefit. Poor people think about spending. Wealthy people think about investing. Poor people minimize price. Wealthy people maximize value. This difference is fundamental. Price focused thinking keeps you poor because you optimize for the wrong thing. You buy cheap things that produce little value. You choose low-cost options that generate low returns. You minimize spending but also minimize results. You save money but lost opportunity. You protect capital but build nothing with it. Value-focused thinking creates wealth because you optimize for returns. You invest in high value even if high price. You choose options that produce maximum benefit even if they cost more. You maximize results even if it means higher spending. You deploy capital toward high return even if it means high investment. You build value regardless of cost. You create returns regardless of price. You focus on what you get, not what you pay. Poor people focus on price. Wealthy people focus on value. Poor people minimize cost. Wealthy people maximize return. Poor people protect their money by spending less. Wealthy people grow their money by investing in high value. Poor people save by buying cheap. Wealthy people build by buying best. This determines whether you stay poor or become wealthy. Poor people see obstacles. Wealthy people see opportunities. When challenges appeared in my path, when difficulties arose, when problems emerged, I had a choice. See them as obstacles that prevent progress, or see them as opportunities that create advantage. See them as reasons to stop, or see them as chances to advance. See them as barriers, or see them as openings. Poor thinking sees obstacles. Problems are threats. Difficulties are barriers. Challenges are reasons to quit. Competition is danger. Change is risk. Everything difficult is a reason not to try. Everything challenging is evidence it cannot be done. Everything hard is justification for giving up. Obstacles everywhere, preventing everything, making success impossible. This obstacle-focused thinking keeps you trapped. Because if everything is an obstacle, nothing is possible. If every difficulty is a barrier, no progress can be made. If every challenge is a reason to quit, you quit constantly. If every problem is a threat, you never act. If obstacles are everywhere, you go nowhere. Wealthy thinking sees opportunities. Problems create openings for solutions. Difficulties create advantage for those who overcome them. Challenges separate winners from quitters. Competition eliminates the weak. Change creates new possibilities. Everything difficult is opportunity for those capable of doing difficult things. Everything challenging is chance to gain advantage by doing what others cannot do. Everything hard is filter that eliminates competition and rewards persistence. The Bessemer process was an opportunity, a difficult new technology that most steelmakers could not master. A challenge that separated those who could learn from those who could not. A barrier for those who saw obstacles. An opening for those who saw opportunity. I saw opportunity. I invested in learning it, mastering it, implementing it, and it gave me enormous advantage because I saw opportunity where others saw obstacles. Poor people see problems. Wealthy people see possibilities. Poor people see barriers. Wealthy people see openings. Poor people see reasons to quit. Wealthy people see chances to advance. Poor people see obstacles. Wealthy people see opportunities. Poor people see why it cannot be done. Wealthy people see how it can be done. Poor people see threats. Wealthy people see advantages. This difference determines who advances and who stays stuck. Poor people blame circumstances. Wealthy people take responsibility. When things went wrong in my early years, when I faced setbacks, when I encountered problems, I could have blamed circumstances, blamed poverty, blamed my immigrant status, blamed my lack of education, blamed the system, blamed the wealthy, blamed anyone and everyone except myself. This is poverty thinking. Blaming keeps you powerless. If circumstances are responsible for your situation, you cannot change your situation. If external forces control your outcomes, you cannot control your outcomes. If other people are at fault for your poverty, you cannot escape poverty. Blaming removes agency, removes control, removes power, removes responsibility, removes the ability to change anything, because if it is not your fault, it is not your problem to solve. And if it is not your problem to solve, you do not solve it. You just blame forever, while staying exactly where you are. Wealthy thinking takes responsibility, not because wealthy people caused their circumstances, but because taking responsibility gives power. If you are responsible, you can change things. If you control your outcomes, you can improve your outcomes. If your decisions matter, you can make better decisions. If your actions determine results, you can take different actions. Taking responsibility gives agency, gives control, gives power, gives the ability to change, because if it is your responsibility, it is your problem to solve. And if it is your problem to solve, you can solve it. I took responsibility for my poverty, not because I caused it, but because blaming would keep me poor. I took responsibility for my future, not because I controlled everything, but because taking responsibility gave me power to change what I could control. I took responsibility for my outcomes, not because I determined all outcomes, but because responsibility meant I could act to improve outcomes. Taking responsibility gave me power, gave me agency, gave me control, gave me the ability to change my circumstances instead of just blaming my circumstances. Poor people blame. Wealthy people take responsibility. Poor people see external causes. Wealthy people see internal control. Poor people point fingers. Wealthy people look in mirrors. Poor people say, "It is not my fault." Wealthy people say, "It is my responsibility." Poor people wait for circumstances to change. Wealthy people change. The response to circumstances. Poor people want someone else to fix it. Wealthy people fix it themselves. This determines who stays powerless and who gains power. I was poor. I thought like a poor person. I saw the world through poverty lens. I made decisions with poverty mindset, and I stayed poor as long as I thought that way. Then I changed my thinking. I started thinking like a wealthy person before I had any wealth. I focused on assets, not income. I calculated risk instead of avoiding it. I invested windfalls instead of spending them. I built systems to work for me instead of just working for money. I thought exponentially instead of linearly. I focused on value instead of price. I saw opportunities instead of obstacles. I took responsibility instead of blaming. I thought like a wealthy person while still poor. And over time, over years, over decades, thinking differently and acting on that different thinking, I became wealthy. The difference between poor and wealthy is thinking, not circumstances, not luck, not inheritance, not advantages. Thinking, how you see money, how you see risk, how you see opportunity, how you see time, how you see value, how you see responsibility, how you see possibility. How you think determines how you act. How you act determines what you build. What you build determines whether you stay poor or become wealthy. Poor thinking keeps you poor. Wealthy thinking creates wealth. Not immediately, not magically, not certainly, but eventually, over time, through consistent action guided by wealthy thinking, through years of making decisions that wealthy people make, through decades of building what wealthy people build, through refusing to think like poor people think even when you are poor, through thinking like wealthy people think before you have any evidence it will work, through changing your thinking before your circumstances change and waiting for circumstances to follow thinking, which they do, eventually, inevitably, if you persist long enough with wealthy thinking. This is how I escaped poverty, not through luck, not through advantages, through thinking, through changing how I saw everything, through adopting wealthy thinking before I had wealth, through persisting with that thinking for decades, through letting that thinking guide my actions, through letting those actions build my wealth, through refusing to think like poor people think even when I was poor, through thinking like wealthy people think long before I was wealthy. You can do the same if you change your thinking, if you focus on assets, not income, if you calculate risk instead of avoiding it, if you invest instead of consuming, if you build systems instead of just working, if you think exponentially instead of linearly, if you focus on value instead of price, if you see opportunities instead of obstacles, if you take responsibility instead of blaming, if you think like wealthy people think, starting now, before you have wealth, before you have evidence, before you have proof, just changing your thinking and persisting with that thinking and acting on that thinking and building based on that thinking for years, for decades, until your circumstances match your thinking, until your wealth reflects your mindset, until you become what you have been thinking. That is the difference between how the poor think and how the wealthy build. Poor people think about income, risk avoidance, spending, working for wages, linear progress, price, obstacles, and blame. Wealthy people think about assets, calculated risk, investing, building systems, exponential growth, value, opportunities, and responsibility. Change your thinking from poor to wealthy, and your circumstances will eventually change from poor to wealthy. Not immediately, but inevitably, through consistent action guided by wealthy thinking over years and decades of building. That is how I did it. That is how anyone can do it. Change your thinking. Change your life. Think like wealthy people think. Build like wealthy people build. And become what you think. Eventually, inevitably, through thinking differently and building consistently toward the wealth that wealthy thinking creates.